We appreciate everyone coming out this afternoon to our presentation here at the Schwamigan Veterans Center. We're going to give you a real quick outline of what we're going to do so you know what to look forward to. My name is Jason Janicek. I'm the post commander for VFW Post 690. My co-presenter is Walter Gursky. You want to tell where you're from?
My name is Walter Gursky. I'm the Vice Commander of Sons of the American Legion Squadron 90.
Okay. And we'll be your host today for our George Barr Day presentation, where we just want to share a little bit about one of our former local citizens who had a significant part in World War II. Our list of events, we're going to start off with our Honorable Mayor. We'll call her up here in a short minute, and we'll have a few remarks. And Walter and I will thrill you with a PowerPoint presentation that will try to keep less than 4 or 5 hours, but no. PowerPoint presentation itself will probably be a little more than an hour. And at that point in time, for those of you who we talked to before who knew George and Marcine and their family, we'll give you an opportunity to say a few remarks. And then we have another special guest. We have the State Commander of the Veterans Foreign Wars here, Corey Geisler, out from downstate. He'll say a few remarks. Then we'll have a special presentation with our Northern College guests. I saw them come in there with our Northern College guests. And then we'll do our closing and a few closing remarks. So I know we do have a few special guests here I do want to introduce. Besides, we have the mayor, our VFW State Commander, and we also have our VFW District Commander up from Shell Lake, George Kusick. Frank Koska, he's a past commander of the State American Legion as well. I think we also have Senator, our state senator was here. Did she show up?
Sure, she's here.
Oh, and Assemblywoman Myers, thank you for coming up. And I think we had a representative from Congressman Tiffany's office in the corner. We appreciate you all coming up. It is important for our elected representatives to recognize and remember our service members' service as well. So, with that being that, I am going to officially start our program. And it's tradition in the Veterans Foreign Wars that we start our official meetings with a pledge to our flag. So those who are able to, if you can please stand. You got to remove your caps. Veterans, if you have your service cap, keep your caps on. Veterans, present arms. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Order arms. Thank you. You can go ahead and take your seats. With that, I'm going to call the Honor Guard to please escort Madam Mayor up forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's so good to be with all of you on this, my very last day as mayor for the city of Ashland. When Jason Janicek called me several months ago, I told him, he said, "Are you going to be able to do this?" And I said, "It's going to be my last day." And I am so thrilled that I get to do this as my last official act, other than handing the gavel over to Mayor McKenzie tomorrow evening. But I just want to thank the vets, all of you, and especially Jason and all of the organizers of all of the events over the years for including me, for your graciousness, and for all of the work that you do here in the community. Every time I see you doing ceremonies, or when I see you individually in the community, I hearken to my stepfather, my father, my grandfathers, my uncle, and my cousins who all served. And you are a special breed, and you will always have a special place in my heart. And I'm not saying goodbye to anyone. I'm saying I'll see you around because I'm not leaving town. So it's just really good to be invited, and it's a real privilege today to be here for this event. So I have my last proclamation. It's dated today, April 18th, 2022, and I'll just read it as it's written. kind of as an introduction to why we're all here. Proclamation. Whereas the United States of America was a victim of a surprise, unprovoked military attack by the Empire of Japan on December 7th, 1941, and whereas the subsequent further military successes of the Empire of Japan served to erode American morale and confidence, and whereas on April 18th, 1942, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led an all-volunteer force of 16 Army Air Base B-52 bombers in a retaliatory attack on the Japanese home islands, and whereas Lieutenant George Red Barr, who had come to Ashland, Wisconsin to attend Northland College, was a crew member on one of the bombers, and George Barr was later captured and imprisoned by the Japanese for 3 years, 4 months, and 1 week. And whereas George Barr suffered severe psychological and physical injuries after months of torture and mistreatment and almost 3 years of solitary confinement before returning to the Ashland area after the war and overcoming his wartime injuries to give back to society as a teacher and a coach. And whereas George Barr continued to consider Ashland, Wisconsin his home even later in life. Now, therefore, I, Deborah S. Lewis, the mayor of Ashland, Wisconsin, on behalf of the citizenry, declare that this day, April 18th, 2022, the 80th anniversary of the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, be described as George Red Barr Day in the city of Ashland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor, for that. And we're proud that your last official act is with us here at Schwamigan Veterans. Again, thank you all for coming today. The Mayor's proclamation summed up why we're here today, is to recognize George Barr and his service in World War II. And what Walter and I are going to do is just kind of give you a presentation. We're going to talk about the Doolittle raid itself and Jimmy Doolittle, as well as George and his fellow aircrew members and what they went through. We're not doing this from a prepared speech. We're just going to kind of go through and just kind of have a conversation with y'all about it. So if we get going, we'll have to watch the time because Walter and I get really excited about this topic. So we'll try to get it done sometime this afternoon. So when people start clapping and standing up, we'll know we're going too long. Well, we titled our presentation, The Boys from Shangri-La, George Barr and the Doolittle Raid on Tokyo. As we get started, is there anyone that might have an idea what the Shangri-La reference is in our title? Has anyone heard that used before related to the Doolittle Raid? Somebody has. You want?
Well, my take on it was that when Roosevelt was asked where the raid came from, he didn't want to tell him where it was, so he told him it was from Shangri-La.
And Shangri-La at the time was a fictional utopia location from the book Paradise Lost. It might be a cultural reference kind of lost today, but at the time, I was told at that press conference that all of them except one reporter knew about it, and that reporter was made a lot of fun of when he was taking his notes. But for those who didn't hear, it was Roosevelt's answer at a press conference about where the planes came from. He didn't want to divulge too much information, so he just said our secret airbase at Shangri-La. So that's where that reference is from. But to start off, we're going to give a little context. So I'm going to have Walter here start us off with a little context of what was going on.
So as we had seen before, on December 7th, 1941, the United States entered the Second World War after the Japanese Empire, using carrier-launched aircraft from the combined fleet, attacked the anchorage of the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. During this attack, the bulk of the U.S. battle fleet was destroyed. However, our aircraft carrier force was, more or less just by coincidence, not in the harbor on that day.
Go ahead.
Despite this was followed by a long series of defeats for the United States and for our allies all across the Pacific Theater, with the Hawaiian Islands under threat, Wake Island falls after a siege, the Philippines falls, which in and of itself consists of one of the most significant defeats in the history of the United States military. The British lose Singapore, Hong Kong, and Malaya. In addition, the British fleet is also devastated by Japanese air attacks, effectively leaving the Japanese with almost a clear field in the Pacific for the first couple months of 1942.
Okay, so you see we're at a dark time in World War II for us. This is just the first couple months of World War II. Our losses in the Pacific being pushed back in Africa and Europe. Morale is incredibly low. President Roosevelt immediately wanted something, a retaliatory strike. He wanted something. He wanted to punch Japan in the nose. He wanted the American public to know that we're not out of this fight yet. He wanted something to boost morale. So, and he let his commanders know that. And right away, the month after Pearl Harbor, a plan started to emerge. We're going to move through this kind of quick, but this is trying to give you an introduction. The guy on your left, my right up here is Admiral Ernest King. He was a commander-in-chief of all U.S. naval forces, a very aggressive fighting admiral, and very much in line with President Roosevelt's intention of striking back at the heart of Japan. Because through the next couple months, we were doing small strikes at outposts, but President Roosevelt wanted Japan to feel the brunt of America's response. Admiral King had an officer, one of his aides was a submariner by training, but Captain Francis Lowe, who just happened to come up with the idea after observing carrier pilots doing some takeoff and landing practices on land, and then he had watched some Army bombers training. He went back to Admiral King and thought, can we launch Army bombers from a carrier? Because the key was you had to get the carriers close to Japan. The Navy had single-engine fighter aircraft, single-engine bombers, very limited range. The Army medium bombers had a much greater range, but it's impossible, conventional wisdom said, to launch them from a carrier. They weren't designed for that. Well, he asked the Admiral, can it be possible? He had his officers look into it, thought it's theoretically possible, and they passed the plan on over to the gentleman on the other side of the screen, General Henry Arnold, otherwise known as Hap Arnold. He was the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1942. A little talk on terminology here. You've heard me talk about Army bombers and Air Force. You can hear those terms intermixed a lot. In 1942, the Air Force was part of the Army. So we're going to call them the Army, Army Air Forces, the Air Corps, all those terms interchangeably. General Arnold was given the plan, the suggestion by the Navy about, we'll give you one of our carriers if you can launch medium bombers off of it. And he assigned that, General Arnold was like, that might work. So he assigned it to his staff troubleshooter, by the name, a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. So real quick, who is Jimmy Doolittle? Who's heard of his name at all ever? Most people have. Well, in 1942, everyone knew his name. He was more famous then than he is now. You see, he had been an Army officer in his younger life. See the picture of him in the center. That's in his. We talked about Air Corps, Air Force. That's him in the Army Air Service uniform, early on, and a few other pictures throughout his career. He was in the Army up until about 1930, I think about he got out.
Roughly.
Yeah, from World War I up to about 1930. Was not a participant in World War I. He was an officer stateside doing training. A very incredibly intelligent individual. He actually had a doctorate from MIT, the equivalent of a doctorate in aeronautical engineering. So a very intelligent person. He made his reputation in the early aviation years as a stunt pilot, a racing pilot. But he wasn't reckless. He wasn't what we would consider like a barnstormer. His biographer, Colonel Carroll Glines, called him the master of the calculated risk, because he applied an engineering viewpoint or a scientific viewpoint to a problem before he took a risk. For example, one of these calculated risks that he took, in the upper far corner over there, your right, my left, you see he's in a plane, and right around the edge you can kind of see where he's got like some material. But what he did there, he took off in that plane with that material kind of tarped over him, totally blacked out, demonstrating instrument flying, totally blind. He took off, flew 15 minutes, turned around, came back and landed at the exact same airport with his airplane coming to a stop, they said just feet away from where he took off. totally blind, using only instruments. He did have a pilot in the front seat in case there was an issue, because like I said, he was a master of the calculated risk. He wasn't foolhardy and suicidal. But the pilot in the front flew with his hands over his head the whole time to prove that, and that was to prove the point, convince the aviation world that you can fly by instruments. So that's just an example of some of his thought process, of some of the things that he did in early engineering. He got out of the Army, went to Shell Oil, instrumental in convincing Shell Oil to make a product to sell to the Army that the Army didn't know they needed, high-octane fuel, which ended up being largely responsible for some of the high-performance aircraft we had. So that's Jimmy Doolittle. He came back into the service in 1940 and was placed on General Arnold's staff as a general troubleshooter. One of the first problems General Doolittle had to answer was, what kind of planes do we need?
So the question there comes down to there are 3 medium bombers that are in Army service at the time. And those are the B-23 Dragon, the B-26 Marauder, and the B-25 Mitchell. Now of these 3, the B-23 has a 90-foot wingspan, and they have a 70-foot maximum if they're going to take off from a carrier, so that's out. Before coming to this, one of his primary jobs, Doolittle's, was as a troubleshooter on the B-26 Marauder. So he knew that aircraft well, and he knew full well the takeoff weight was too high. You could not get one of those off of a carrier. The B-25, however, it came just within, about 3 feet. Its wingspan was approximately 3 feet within the parameters that they needed, and it is capable of the 500-foot maximum takeoff distance, at least under the right conditions and with the proper modifications.
Is everyone able to hear us all right back there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Next screen.
We were still gonna. I thought we were gonna.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Sorry about that,
No,
everybody.
I can go back. Would you?
So the next thing, of course, is where are we going to find the aircraft? Where are we going to find our crew? And we need to make the modifications to the aircraft. So the 17th Bomb Group is the only unit that is fully operational in the B-25, and they are doing anti-submarine patrols off the coast of Washington State, and will soon be relocating to the East Coast. Now, so this unit is experienced. We're going to pull our pilots from there. Now, we have to modify the aircraft. So what happened is 24 of these bombers are diverted to be modified at the Mid-Continent Airlines Modification Center in what is now Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Modifications were primarily focused on increasing the range and lowering the weight of the aircraft. And that we have a photo there is showing one of those bombers at Minneapolis where they were kept under 24-hour guard during this modification process. Following this, the aircraft were transferred to Eglin Field in Florida, and it is at this time that the request was made for volunteers. In the interest of secrecy, there was no information about the mission itself given out, but every man volunteered. And it was upon arrival at Eglin that they were first made aware that Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle will be overseeing their training for this operation. And during this period, which is only approximately 1 month at Eglin Field, they go through training in short takeoffs and long navigation at low level over water, as well as general low level flight. They also have a short introduction to, for want of a better word, I guess we'll call it naval protocol, simply how to act aboard a naval vessel.
But at this point in time, they still have not been told what their mission is. They just volunteered for a mission. General Doolittle had brought them all in, like he had said, and to a man they volunteered. But they're still doing training for something that they're not aware of. Moving forward, other actors are at play here too. While the Army is getting ready, training the crews, training the bombers, the Navy is working in the Pacific. The Navy is going to be the ones that are going to have to get these bombers into position. Gentlemen we have here, there's just got Admiral Chester Nimitz and Admiral William Bull Halsey. Admiral Nimitz is the Commander-in-Chief of all Pacific forces. He'd be the one ultimately responsible for it. Admiral Halsey is the one that was given command of the task force that's assigned to take Doolittle's raiders to where they're going to go. This slide is one of Admiral King's aides had gone out there to brief them. Once they were all brought in on the plan, this was just referencing the code message that was sent back. And when the Washington got this, they called down to Eglin and told Doolittle, "Get your boys to California." And it's kind of a we're going to just talk about how they kind of got over there real quick. General Doolittle incorporated that into their training, crossing the country. They went from Eglin Air Force bases, cross country to the coast of California. And he told his boys, you're going to fly low and practice your low-level flying. And all these crews, I mean, they're young American boys. They're all in their 20s, young 20s. You know, I think about 20 on George Barr's plane. I think 23 was the average age. So they're young and full of vigor, I guess is what we'll call it. So they took him literally when they hedge hopped across the country. There's stories and interviews about them chasing cattle across the Texas plains, about cars actually having to get off roads. So they definitely had some fun. They probably had a few fish shaken at them from ranchers and farmers and stuff. And the gunner, one of the enlisted men on Barr's aircraft even joked about having to clear sagebrush off the bottom of the aircraft when they were flying over there. And if you would have been in San Francisco in 1942 at the end of March, you probably would have seen a few twin-engine Army bombers ducking underneath some of the bridges, which officially was probably frowned upon. You kind of had to know for sure there was no wires under there. But just touching on the Navy one more time, when they got to California, they're going to be put on an aircraft carrier with we'll talk about the Hornet in a little bit. The USS Hornet, newly commissioned. But this gentleman here, I'm just going to introduce, Captain Mark Meisher. He's wearing the uniform of an admiral. This is later in the war, but he's significant because A, he's the commander of the Hornet, the aircraft carrier that's going to carry Doolittle and his raiders to the coast of Japan. But he's also has a Wisconsin connection. He was born in Hillsboro, Wisconsin. I have to confess, I'm not quite sure exactly where Hillsboro is. Anyone know where Hillsboro is?
Down by Eau Claire.
Down by Eau Claire. So he's almost even in northern Wisconsin. Like that's getting closer. So yeah. So he is graduated near the bottom of his class from the U.S. Naval Academy after 2 attempts. He had to be he kind of got asked to leave politely by the government, but he was able to come back in. Graduated near the bottom of his class, but he ended up being one of the top naval aviators. He's actually in the International Air and Space Hall of Fame, I believe.
So the USS Hornet is actually the newest carrier in the fleet, and actually it has specifically for this mission been ordered to transit the Panama Canal and has been holding station off of California, excuse me, awaiting the arrival of these aircraft. Once the aircraft arrive, they are loaded on by crane. They are actually, as we can see here in the photograph, these are actually too large to be fit into the hangars below deck. So instead, they actually have to be lashed to the deck of the carrier for transit. And we have 16 of these aircraft stacked essentially from as far forward as they can get reasonably all the way up to where they are chalked against the back edge of the flight deck.
And I don't know if we touched on, but we should probably touch on why is this such a big gamble for the Navy? I mean, why is this putting these bombers that aren't supposed to be on a carrier and sailing them over there? Why is this such a big deal for the Navy at this point of the war? Because there's 2 aircraft carriers involved here.
Yes, we have 2 carriers involved here, because in addition to the Hornet, the USS Enterprise is also accompanying. That's Admiral Halsey's flagship, and that is coming along because, again, with the bombers on the deck here, the Hornet cannot launch its own aircraft to defend itself if it needs to. And with the battle fleet having been destroyed, we don't have any heavy warships to escort this task force. We have 5 carriers at the time, and one of them, the USS Yorktown, has actually been damaged and is in port. So we have 4 operational carriers right now, and that effectively is the sum total of our capital ship power in the Pacific. So by sending 2 carriers on this mission deep into Japanese waters, we are risking 50% of our operational fleet strength.
You can probably imagine Admiral Nimitz is having some sleepless nights right now because all he has are these 4 carriers that miraculously weren't at Pearl Harbor. At one point in time, he actually sent a memo to Washington saying that when they were pushing him to make more aggressive maneuvers, he said, my force is inferior to the Japanese Navy at this time. And he got a very tersely worded response from Admiral King saying, your force is not inferior to the Japanese. But Admiral Nimitz was very hesitant to risk his carriers needlessly. So that's why, like you said, there's probably some sleepless nights about this. Okay, sorry about the technical things we're getting there, but okay, we're just going to introduce you to the crews a little bit. There are 16 total aircraft. We're only going to talk about 2 crews primarily. We're going to introduce you to 3 crews. Raider 1 was with Jimmy Doolittle himself, and we're going to go back to Jimmy Doolittle a little bit, because we know that he commanded the raid. We know that he was in command of the first aircraft, but when he was assigned by General Arnold, he was one of General Arnold's aides. He was just assigned as a project officer to get this plan in motion. He was not initially designated to be the commander. He was 40 years old, in his 40s. General Arnold said, "You're too old for this type of adventure," but I think there was some chicanery afoot to get him as commander. How did that come about?
Well, Doolittle waited until almost the last possible moment, shortly before they left Eglin Field, before he went to meet with Arnold. And he asked again to lead the mission. He had occasionally brought this up before. Now he's bringing it up again. Can I lead the mission? And eventually he managed to get Arnold to agree, all right, if my chief of staff agrees, you can lead the raid. And almost before he'd finished saying it, Doolittle was running down the hall to get to the chief of staff's office. He reached it, and he asked him, and of course the response was, well, if Hap says so, I suppose you can. And as Doolittle turned around to leave the office, the phone rang, and he heard the chief of staff saying, but Hap, I just told him he could go.
It's kind of like a classic parent, well, if it's okay with your mom kind of thing. But no, he kind of got the better of General Arnold there, because it was General Arnold's intention that he not go. And I guess General Arnold had a few words, but he let Doolittle go. But this is General Doolittle's crew of the first aircraft, and every crew had a five crew member complement. We had a navigator, a pilot, a gunner / mechanic, crew chief engineer, multi-purpose enlisted crew member, a co-pilot, and a bombardier. And obviously we have Colonel Doolittle, the short guy, gentleman right here. The co-pilot, we're just going to talk about him for about 10 seconds here. Lieutenant Dick Cole, retired from the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. And I'm going to go back to Walter a little bit again, because I think we've got a little anecdote about Colonel Cole, because of course he has the status of the Raiders.
Yes.
Right?
He was actually the last of the Raiders to pass away in 2019. And actually I had the pleasure of meeting him at an event at the Fagan Fighters Museum in Granite Falls, Minnesota several years ago, which actually I was able to get his book signed, and it was just a very interesting experience to get to listen to the last Doolittle Raider describe his experience while we all sat under the wing of a B-25.
And I know I said that this presentation is long, we don't want to keep you here all afternoon, but Walter and I just love talking about this. There's one anecdote that I'm going to throw in here. Walter's probably groaning, said we talked about this. But no, the one story I heard, they took off from the aircraft carrier in their flight. It's a long flight to Japan. And one story I heard is that Lieutenant Cole all of a sudden started singing the Wabash Cannonball. I think that was a country western tune that was popular at the time. And as the story is related to me, he's just, singing it, tapping his feet, tapping his fingers and stuff like this. And all of a sudden he just kind of looks over there, and there's this legendary lieutenant colonel just kind of staring at him like, what are you doing? So I just thought it was kind of funny, because I can just picture that. He must have had his earbuds in listening to a Spotify, right? But no, he said he was just getting a weird look from Colonel Doolittle, like, what are you doing? So I guess he was getting a little excited. What? This is just a view of the deck of the Hornet. Again, you can see how big these Mitchell bombers are, and how short they really had to take off. Now, obviously, that hole there is the elevator, so that's going to actually be flat when the elevator is up, and the deck is flat, and the guardrails are actually come down. But you can see just how big these Mitchell bombers are to that whole deck. We're going to introduce you to a second crew, Raider 6, the 6 aircraft. They nicknamed their aircraft the Green Hornet. Some of the crews named their aircraft, some didn't. These guys have the name of the Green Hornet. That was a comic book character at the time. One interesting tidbit that has absolutely nothing to do with the Doolittle Raiders was, I had read somewhere, is everyone familiar with the Lone Ranger? Yeah. I watched them a lot as a kid. Maybe someone who's more familiar with the Green Hornet can tell me that, but I'd always been told that the character of the Green Hornet is, in the comic book world, the grandson of John Reed, who was the Lone Ranger. Has anyone ever heard that before? Okay, well, I swear I've read that somewhere before, so somebody must have just linked those two characters together. But getting back on task, the Green Hornet, Raider 6. There were 2 crews that were captured in the raid. This was one of them. And we're going to introduce you from your right to the left. We got Sergeant William Dieter, the short guy. Lieutenant Bob Mader, the mustache officer standing in front. Then we have Corporal Donald Fitzmaurice, the enlisted soldier in the center. Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, and then Lieutenant Chase Nielsen. Of this crew, Lieutenant Nielsen is the only one that would return to the United States alive. Everyone else would die as a result of this raid. The 2 enlisted members would die when their plane crashed. Lieutenant Hallmark would be executed by the Japanese, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And Lieutenant Meter would die of malnutrition and mistreatment by the Japanese. So that is the 6th aircraft. And you just want to touch on this, why this is significant right here, this photograph?
Sure. So this photograph, we have a look at, this is straight on from the island of the aircraft carrier. And what we are seeing here is number 6, the Green Hornet. We are seeing just the tail of it right there. We can see its identification number, the tail gun part of the roundel there. And also, just as a side note to this, has anyone ever seen the movie 30 Seconds Over Tokyo? Or read the book? That was written by Ted Lawson, right? Yes. And he was the pilot of number 8,
7.
right there. Number 7. Mixing my numbers up. The ruptured duck, which is right in the center of this photograph.
And we talked about the modifications earlier. You see my little highlighted circle there. Did you touch on the broomsticks?
So yes, that was one of the modifications, one of the more interesting little modifications that they did. Many of the weapons that were on board the B-25s were removed, again, in the interest of saving weight. And someone had the idea that why don't we, in that rear position, which would normally have a tail gun, why don't we put a couple of broomsticks in there, paint them black, and hope to try to bluff any Japanese interceptors? And we have a good view of that right there. And as you can tell from a distance, one really can't tell that those aren't machine guns poking out of there.
And the first time I had ever heard about the Doolittle raid was I was a kid. I read a Boy's Life magazine and read about the Doolittle raid. All I remember was the name Jimmy Doolittle, the Uss Hornet, and broomsticks instead of machine guns. But that's what those are. Those are those painted broomsticks. Okay, now we're going to get to Raider 16, nicknamed the Bat Out of Hell. This is George Barr's aircraft. He is the navigator on this aircraft, and we'll start talking about him a little bit. But I'm going to introduce you to his crew. We've got on the far side there Corporal Jacob Deshauser. He's from Oregon. He is 28 years old. He is the lowest ranking, but the oldest crew member right now. He is the bombardier. Next to him, we have Lieutenant Bob Height from Texas. He is about, I think he's going to be 22. In the middle, we have Sergeant, is it Howard?
Harold Spatz.
Harold Spatz, sorry. Harold Spatz. I feel bad for forgetting his name because I said his name so much in the last month. Sergeant Spatz. He's from Oklahoma. He was 20 years old. He would be executed by the Japanese. And again, we'll talk about that later. Lieutenant Bill Farrell from South Carolina. He's 22, 23. I think he's 22 here. He is the pilot. And then we have our very own, this is Lieutenant George Barr, nickname of Red Barr, because vivid red hair, but you can't tell in these black and white photographs. So that is Lieutenant Barr. You're gonna hear us refer to him as lieutenant, as captain. He got out. He eventually got to the rank of captain. During the period we're talking about, he's a lieutenant, but you might hear us refer to him as both. Same as Doolittle, he was a general later, so you might hear us refer to him as both. So let's introduce you to the reason we're here today, George Barr. Here's a couple pictures from Northland College. He was a basketball star, but George Barr was born April 6, 1917, in Yonkers, New York. He was orphaned at an early age. His dad died when he was very young. And he had a sister that his mom, as my understanding, couldn't take care of. So he was moved into a boys' home, and his sister was adopted by a family. Now, I don't know much about his early life, so if there's I don't know if you have some family members watching, people that knew him, so I'm hoping I'm getting some of these facts correct. Don't hesitate to raise your hand, someone that knows personally, and correct me. But my understanding is that he went into kind of a boys' home. A married couple took in his sister. I want to say her name was Grace. Hope her name is Grace. We'll call her George's sister.
That's right.
The Towns, thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Towns, they were social workers, and they had taken the sister in, but they kept close contact with George. So George and his sister had contact. They were over and stuff, but they could only take in one of them. So he grew up in New York. His sister came to Northern College. There was some friend connections where she knew someone that had worked at Northern College. She came to Northern College. She graduated, class of 1935 it is, I believe. And George followed her here. In 1936, he came here from New York. And between 1936 and 1941, he was a student at Northern College. Now, he would attend college, then he'd take some time off to work because he had to pay tuition. He worked some here. 1 year he went back to New York and worked. I think his first year here, with one of his friends that he found, he actually got involved in some wildfire fighting. Because remember, there's a significant fire?
Yes, they volunteered to fight. There was a wildfire in the area, and they had volunteered to go and help to attempt to contain that.
So Red, as he was known, was quite popular on campus, I'm told. As you can see, got into basketball. He also played baseball too, but people really only remember him for his basketball. I'm told that he's one of the best basketball players that Northern College had ever seen. He had been on 4 teams, captain for 2 years. But he had always wanted to be. He'd always thought about being in the Air Corps. He wanted to be a pilot. 1941, in February of 1941, the last semester of his final year, he and another student, George Zeman, I'm not familiar with that name, but he's from Benoit, so he's local, went up to Superior, took a physical, and they both enlisted in the military. George got accepted into the aviation cadet program in the Army Air Corps. He did start pilot training, but he ended up washing out. He said it was his lack of perception. He had a coordination issue, which is weird because all the accolades you hear about his skills on the basketball court, that he didn't have the skills. But he ended up being moved into a navigator program, which is probably more of a intellectually type thing.
Yeah.
So he graduated as a navigator, and just prior to Pearl Harbor, he got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Air Corps. He was assigned to the 17th Bomb Group out in Oregon, and then they had January they had moved to Columbia, South Carolina to start doing anti-submarine patrols off of the coast. So that's catching us up with George. You just want to talk about these a little bit?
Yeah, so this is one of the couple of photographs that exist of the Bat Out of Hell. And as I had mentioned earlier about how tight they were on the deck, you can actually see, because this was the last plane off the deck, and you can see how the landing gear is chalked right against the back of the flight deck, and the rear fuselage is actually projecting a fair ways off the back of the carrier.
And you can see some sailor, and you kind of give a perception of how big these planes are compared to the people. Well, they're big for the Navy, yet they're not really big at all. You know what I mean? Because you can see how there's not much space in there, but I guess it's relative. Just another view, again, showing that's how tight they were, showing the tail hanging over the deck. This picture, this is just on the aircraft carrier. Because after they had flown across country, they had flown to the West Coast. They had been put on the aircraft carrier, and they had sailed out. They met up with the Enterprise, and they're sailing west towards Japan. This is a picture of the crew. 2 things to note here. One, you see Colonel Doolittle and Captain Meisher on the front there. And Captain Meisher is passing something to Colonel Doolittle, which you're eventually going to pin up on the bar. Walter, what are they doing there?
So, they have a collection of medals that have been brought in to them, and these were given to American servicemen and diplomatic personnel over the interwar period for various reasons, for service in Japan, simply being present for major events, etc. And these had been sent in from all over so that when we finally did manage to bomb Japan, these would be returned, which is what they are doing, is wiring them to the bombs. I actually have an example of one of those medals on the table here today also.
I guess the government was getting these mailed back to them in droves, asking for them to be sent back to Japan with interest. But of note on here also, besides Captain Meisher, and I'm going to bring up my fancy little highlighter again. Right here, maybe. Right there is our Lieutenant Barr. You can see he's kind of, I'd say I'd recognize his shocker red hair, but it's kind of hard in these black and white pictures. So I am convinced, I'm very positive that is George Barr. I don't know if anyone that knows what he looks like would agree or disagree with me, but I believe that is George right there, Lieutenant Barr. Something else of note here, you want to know is the covering over the cowling on the plane. Is just for the sea spray, to keep the sea spray and stuff out of the plane. Just another picture as well showing the group again of Raiders. Again, we just want to show, it's another view of Lieutenant Barr. You can see kind of his face, right? Oops. Sorry. I honestly didn't have this problem when we rehearsed, did I?
No.
There he is. There is George right there again. You can see that he is 6'2". He is taller than a good bunch of his compatriots there. Okay, so we're this is early April 1942. We're steaming west. We've got 2 aircraft carriers and our assorted destroyers and cruisers as escorts. Admiral Nimitz and Admiral Halsey are getting more nervous by the mile, but they know they have to get Doolittle as close to Japan as possible. A couple things at play here. Their goal is 400 miles. Right now they're just under 700 miles. Early morning of April 18th, they're just under 700 miles when we're sighted. The morning of April 18th, Task Force 16 is sighted by a Japanese fishing boat. They're drafted by the Navy as picket boat, the Nito Maru. Admiral Halsey drives some evasive action, but by 7:38 a.m. they have confirmation that radio signals are coming from that boat. So they've been located. They're just over 650 miles, which is pretty much Doolittle's estimate of their maximum range of getting to Japan and maybe making China. This message was flashed from Admiral Halsey on the Enterprise to the Hornet, to Colonel Doolittle and Gallant Command, good luck and God bless you. Minutes later, the command went out from Captain Meisher, Army pilots, man your planes. They're about 12 hours earlier than they intended to go, and about 200 miles earlier. I reminded of the scene in the movie Midway when they depict the Doolittle raid, and Doolittle goes on the deck, gives him his briefing, and the pilot says, "Colonel, how far are we?" "Too far," is his response. And I don't know exactly what Colonel Doolittle said, but too far. So they got in their planes. This is a picture of one of the planes taken off. You can see the seas. They were rough seas there. Admiral Halsey is recorded as saying that it was the first time in his career that he can remember seeing the water coming up over the deck of the aircraft carrier. You can see that it's a wooden deck on these carriers back then. They haven't gone to steel decks yet. You can see that the deck is wet. Over on the far side there, you can see the landing officer. I don't know. I'm not a Navy person. I apologize. I don't know what you call Is there any Navy sailors that know aircraft carriers? We'll call him the deckhand with the flag. Sorry. The gentleman with the flag, he is responsible for getting that plane off of there. What the pilots are doing right now, they are revving up that plane. Because remember, these are Army land-based bombers that are used to having anywhere from 1,500 to many thousands of feet to take off and build up their speed. We've got less than 500 feet here. Some of them, I think one of them, Doolittle took off at 270, I think.
I believe
but
so.
Very short, hundreds of feet. So they got to rev up their engine, get their engines into the red, keep their brakes on. That guy's watching the up and down of the aircraft carrier. Essentially what he did was the aircraft carrier was going down, he was timing it, and when it's going down, he's given the flag to go, and that pilot is, on his judgment, letting the brakes go with the hope that when the plane gets to the takeoff point that the aircraft carrier is coming back up. Doolittle was the first one to take off, and the sailors at the time gave them all a 50% chance. Sailors are being sailors. They're making bets. There's a 50% chance that these pilots weren't going to make it. 100% of them did, but they weren't sure Doolittle did because he actually disappeared. Because remember, that deck is going up, so he disappeared. But then he did end up making it. So just one more. There's another picture. You can see the deckhand there is going down. So that means this plane is actually moving. So 16 planes took off. The original plan was for Doolittle to take off at night, drop some incendiary bombs over Tokyo, and basically light the way for hours later. But with them being discovered, Halsey wanted to get those planes off the deck, and he needed to get his carriers turned around and out of there. Because again, the priority is we can't sacrifice these carriers. So these airplanes are taken off. The general plan is, again, bomb Japan, make it to China, hopefully find a Chinese nationalist air base to land on, which none of them did. George Barr's plane Battle of the Hell was the last plane to take off. They had a little mishap early. The wind was coming. While they're waiting to go, the wind is just buffeting the ship. And the nose, I actually started to lift the nose up of the plane. And some of the details I read, they had sailors come out to grab some ground guide ropes and try to kind of keep that plane steady. But the wind came and actually blew, I forget his name again. Seaman First Class Robert Wall from the Hornet's deck crew was actually blown into the starboard propeller, taking his arm off. He lived. Bob Height, the co-pilot, was up here and saw that. He saw that, and talk about unnerving someone before you take off, seeing that. Seaman Wall kind of yelled up to him, "Give him hell for me." Lieutenant Height couldn't hear him, obviously, but he could tell what he had said. Lieutenant Barr was also aware of what happened. It kind of unnerved him, too. I have a quote here from Lieutenant Barr. "The accident unnerved me. It was all I could think about as we lined up for our takeoff. I hoped it wasn't going to be a taste of worse to come." Well, that was probably a prophetic statement. But Battle of the Hell had some other issues, too. When Corporal Deschazer, this is where Jacob Deschazer rode, right up in here, the bombardier. When he got up to his spot in the plane, he realized that we have a hole in our plexiglass nose. He figured that the tail of plane 15 must have hit him and broken that. Well, he didn't want to report it to Lieutenant Farrell, because if they didn't go, the Army was going to push, or the Navy was going to push their plane out to the side, and they were going to not go. Because the one thing, none of them did not want to not go, no matter how scared they were. Or I guess the phrase is, one of them said, "It's not that we wanted to go, but we were scared not to go." And as a combat veteran, I can identify that a lot, because it's not that we don't get scared, but we're almost more scared of not doing our job. So even up till the last minute, up till the day before this, Doolittle, because he had extra crews on board, he gave them the chance to back out without any words asked. But as the one crew member said, as scared as we were to go, we were more scared to not go. So they did end up taking off. This is the only picture we could find. I think there's only a couple pictures of the bombing raid itself over Japan, and they were from a privately purchased camera. We had talked about if there was cameras on there, but we can't find any record of any official photographs.
Yes, there were cameras actually placed into the bubbles at the rear end of the aircraft where the tail guns would have been, but due to the fact that none of the aircraft were able to land, that footage seems to have been lost.
Okay, so this is actually of a naval base. This is not from plane 16, but just kind of giving you an example of how low they were. Lieutenant Farrell's plane, they came in low. He was given two options. He wasn't going to Tokyo. He had Osaka or Nagoya as his options, depending on the situation. He selected as the aircraft commander. He selected their section option in Nagoya. So that's where they headed to. They came in at 500 feet off the ground, averaging about 200 miles an hour. 500 feet isn't very high off the ground. And they rose up to as high as 1,000. He dropped his 4 incendiary bombs. They hit a gas company, the Toho Gas Company, and a Mitsubishi manufacturing plant. Now, Mitsubishi, they weren't manufacturing cars. They're manufacturing Zero fighter planes. So they had an fighter plane manufacturing plant and a gas company. And then they got out of there. The Japanese did fire some anti-aircraft fire. Not a single plane was significantly hit. And actually, I read in some places that the anti-aircraft fire did more damage in Tokyo than some of the planes did.
Yes, the anti-aircraft fire was fairly ineffective, and actually the Japanese did attempt to launch interceptors, but because the bombers were coming in so low, they almost universally they were too high.
And one of the factors is they still weren't conceiving of a long-range attack. When they got the word of the aircraft carriers, they figured they still had 300 miles or a half a day or a day to go, 12 hours to go. they didn't think they were going to launch from almost 700 miles out. So they thought they had a little bit of cushion of time. And plus the interceptors were way too high. Because I've read accounts of the crew seeing the fighters above them, but not noticing them. And a couple times, a couple planes were chased by fighters, but the BH-25s are very fast.
Yes.
And they could definitely outdistance the fighters. But their problem was fuel. They left Japan, and every plane was on their own. The goal was to get to Japan, get to China, find a friendly airfield, and land. That plan didn't come to fruition through so much secrecy that the Army and the Navy didn't share enough information with the forces in China to know what was going on. Essentially what happened, 2 of our crews were captured. The Bat Out of Hell, Plane 16. They got over mainland China, but then they ran out of fuel because their luck continued to turn. They had a tailwind coming from the Hornet. After they left Japan, they had a headwind hit them, plus bad weather. They ran out of fuel. Lieutenant Barr, being the navigator, he actually gave us an alternate route that he figured to put them over friendly or nationalist China land. Lieutenant Farrell, but they would have had to bail out and lose the craft. Lieutenant Farrell, the pilot, made a command decision that we're going to do everything we can to try to land this plane and save the plane. Well, they ran out of gas while they're still over occupied China. They ended up bailing out anyways, and they were all captured. Barr was captured almost immediately.
Yes, he just had the misfortune. He landed almost directly on top of a Japanese checkpoint. He was captured within minutes.
So here is one of the first pictures of them in captivity. This is his crew. Of note here, you have, on the far side, you have Corporal Deschazer. Then you have Sergeant Schatz, Lieutenant Height, then Lieutenant Farrell without the captain, and Lieutenant Barr is on the far end there. A couple things to note about the Japanese officers. The ones with the white armbands, those are Kempe Tai, or basically the Japanese secret police. We've all heard of the German Gestapo for the Nazis. Well, these are the equivalent of the Japanese. Another picture of Lieutenant Barr. It's kind of a unique picture. We don't really expect to see a picture of him smiling with the Japanese captors. This was early on when they still thought there was a chance that they'd be treated as prisoners of war. And the story behind this picture goes is that he was looking out a window with a guard when a photographer or someone tripped and fell. So Barr was kind of chuckling at that when the picture was taken. Another picture, this is Lieutenant Height, the co-pilot. Famous picture of him, one of the more famous pictures of the Raiders. The Japanese treated them as war criminals, and they tortured them pretty aggressively. So Walter's going to talk a little bit about the torture. We won't go into too much detail.
Almost immediately after their capture, they were placed in utterly squalid conditions. That's the first thing I just want to mention. Typically crowded in with large numbers of Chinese and whoever else they may have had in the area. And they began taking them off for individual interrogation. And the torture, it began with just the relatively simple things. One that Lieutenant Barr referred to as the slugger, who would simply hit them. And actually it was from a blow from this man that cost him his hearing in one ear. And later on, they got more inventive with the torture. One was involving the use of a thick bamboo pole. It was placed behind the knees, and they were forced to kneel on it. And then the Japanese soldiers would then jump onto their shins to pop their kneecaps. Another one involved using sharpened bamboo spikes and rammed into the nerves between the fingers.
And we got and Barr described vividly. He was subjected of all the 8. He was subjected the most to what we would know as waterboarding. And I first heard about waterboarding right after 9/11 when they had that whole debate about advanced interrogation techniques, I guess it was called. But the most vivid description I ever read was in these prisoners were describing it in some of their interviews afterwards. And the waterboarding is where they put the rag over your mouth, they hold them down, and they pour the water over them, and basically they take them to the point of dying from drowning, and then pull them back. And he just said there's nothing you can do. And he said it was and Barr was subjected to that a lot. We got 10 more slides left, so in case anyone's wondering, we're getting there. In August, the Japanese held a trial, and we're going to talk about this for just a little bit. I call it a show trial, a monkey trial, a kangaroo court, whatever you want to call it. The Japanese wanted to do something. They were angry. Their homeland had never been attacked, and that was what they told their people. You are safe. Our homeland's never been attacked. They are not going to attack us. They don't have the capability to attack us. And the Army said, we've got you. Well, the Army was pretty ineffective. The Army lost a lot of face. They didn't down a single aircraft. They didn't do any damage. They actually did more damage to Tokyo than did the aircraft with their anti-aircraft fire. So the Japanese were mad. They wanted something to happen. They wanted to execute these prisoners right away. But there was enough in the Japanese government that said, well, we have to make it look okay. So they made a legalistic approach to it. They passed a law after this event, that summer. They passed a law specifically that would allow them to declare them war criminals and hang them. We call it an ex post facto law. They held a trial in August that was 1 hour long, where they brought them in. Some of them were so sick. Lieutenant Hallmark was so sick that he had to be brought in on a stretcher. And it was all in Japanese. And they had signed confessions that the Kempeitai got them out of there, but their confessions that were brought in by torture, they didn't even know what they had signed when they had signed these pieces of paper. So there was no judicial process whatsoever, not even in any sense of the word. And I've known quite a few lawyers. I've worked in the criminal justice system for a while. No lawyers are getting anything done in an hour. I'm sorry. I mean, that's it. So, but to have a capital trial to sentence 8 people to death within an hour is just shows you what a farce that was. 3 of them were eventually executed that fall. We're going to talk about those 3 in a little bit, but this was the scene of the execution. The emperor, in all his generosity, decided he was only going to execute the 2 pilots and the 1 gunner, and the rest of them were sentenced to life in prison under special circumstances. Again, they were not considered prisoners of war. They're considered war criminals. This is the scene of the execution. Contrary to popular myth, they were not beheaded. They were shot. How it happened was they were brought out here, knelt down, tied to these crosses, had a blindfold put on, and had a bullseye painted on their foreheads. And they're shot by a rifle squad from 20 meters away. And how this came about was this morning, 3 of them, Lieutenant Hallmark, Lieutenant Farrell, the pilot of Barr's craft, and Sergeant Spots, the young enlisted soldier from Barr's aircraft, were brought into a room. We don't know what's going on. A Japanese officer came in, talked to him, and then he left, and the interpreter looked at him and said, "They're going to kill you today." That's pretty much what they said. "Here's some paper and pencil. Write some letters home to your families." So they did. I mean, that's just how it went. "We're going to kill you today. Write your families a letter, and tell them we're not treating you too bad." So that is what we're going to kind of deviate from Barr a little bit. Talk about theirs. We have here are the ones that were executed. We have Jacob Deshauser is the young kid on the left. He was
That's Harold Spatz, Jacob Deschazer.
I'm sorry, I'm getting their names. Thank you for correcting that. Yes, that is Harold Spatz. He was 21 at the time he was shot. Lieutenant Dean Hallmark is on the outside here. He was older. He was 28. From Texas. And the one in the middle, Lieutenant William Farrell. He was 24 years old. After they were shot, the Japanese cremated them, and in their bureaucratic efficiency, kept them at the local funeral home. But the only thing they did was they changed the names on the records. That to me tells me that somebody in the Japanese chain of command knew they were guilty of something not right. You know what I mean? Because if they were confident in what they were doing, they wouldn't have had to change their names. But I know we've been going on for a while. I told you Walter and I kind of get going on this, but I just want to share a letter from Lieutenant Farrell. One of them, I don't think George Barr would mind if I did that. They did write the letters home. They were never mailed. The Japanese never mailed them home. But again, in their bureaucratic efficiency, they translated them to Japanese and kept the letters. War crimes investigators found them at the end of the war. But I'm just going to read an excerpt from the letter that he wrote. So just put yourself in his place. You were just told out of the blue that you're going to be shot today, and this is your chance to say something. So this is his letter, William Farrell to his mom. "I know, Mom, this is going to hit you hard because I was the biggest thing in your life. I say I am sorry not to have treated you with more love and devotion, for not giving you all I could, and will you please forgive me? You are, I realize now, the best mother in the world, that your every action was bent towards making me happy, that you are and always will be a real angel. So let me implore you to keep your chin up. Be brave and strong. I love you, Mom, from the depth of my heart." So not only does he have to digest that his life is over in a matter of hours, he had enough in him to write these words that he thinks his mom is going to read. He wrote another letter, this one to his fiancée. Her name is Elizabeth Sims. He called her Lib. Excuse me. You are to me the only girl that would have meant the condition of my life. This is Lieutenant Farrell right here. I have realized the kind of life being married to you would have meant to me, and I know we would have found complete happiness. It is a pity that we were born in this day and age. At least we had part of that happiness. And then he goes on for a couple paragraphs talking about going over a lot of their dates and a lot of their trips and stuff. And he says, find yourself the good man you deserve, Lib, because you have so much to give him right now. Goodbye, and may God be with you. So even in that moment, that last dark moment, Lieutenant Farrell's thoughts were towards making other ones to burden them up. So I just wanted to share those letters that he had. And I just want to make sure that we don't forget, and thank you for I apologize for the name up there. So these are the 3 that were executed by the Japanese in October of '42. They never told the 5 remaining survivors what happened to them. They just know that we just never saw them again. We just thought they were somewhere else. By now, most of the torture had pretty much stopped. But probably what Barr and the others said is the worst torture is they were confined to solitary confinement. That was their sentence of special circumstances. 23 and a half hours a day in a dark, dingy cell with nothing but their own thoughts to go with. They had a half hour a day that they got to go outside. They did get to see each other a little bit, and there was some communication. And we're going to talk about Lieutenant Meter, who he died in December '43. He ended up dying of malnutrition and dying. But if you want to talk about Lieutenant Meter's contributions to him really quick.
Lieutenant Meter actually is cited by all of the other surviving prisoners as having had a lot to do with just essentially keeping them sane during this period, because they were kept generally in a small cell with no windows and no furniture. Just they had a hole in the corner to use as a bathroom, and otherwise nothing. Not so much as a chair, just a flat floor with one blanket, and that was all they had. And he came up with various little games to help keep them entertained, and it was things like catching the lice, or he came up with fun names for the guards. And of course, one of the biggest ones he came up with is he had the idea that all of them have been trained in Morse code. So by coming up with a system of pounding on the wall or scratching on the wall for a dot and a dash, and they were able to thus communicate, at least rudimentarily, with each other through the cell walls.
So he died essentially of what was called beriberi, which is a lack of proper nutrition. He essentially starved to death. George Barr is the one who discovered that, because George was the one who had been detailed to deliver the food, the little bit of food they had, the watery, wormy rice, the cold tea, which is pretty much all they had to live on. And when he slid it through his door, Bob didn't come out. He was curled up and he was dead. So that had a big impact on them. Probably the most significant, not the most significant, but George Barr had one more episode of significant physical torture that happened several months later. And Walter, you just want to touch on that?
This was near the end of their time in captivity, and they had been, over this period, relocated to various prisons, and at this point had ended up in a specially built facility in Peiping, China. And it was during their exercise periods they were allowed to wear, they were kind of a sort of a slipper that they were given to wear, and it was during this period where they were running, but they would often not wear these slippers because they were so poorly fitted. So they would run barefoot, and then afterwards they would wash their feet. In this case, for reasons unknown, the Japanese guard told Barr specifically that he had to wash his feet in the snow. And Barr refused and tried to walk toward the tap that they normally would use for this purpose. And the Japanese guard attempted to force him to stop. There was a short scuffle, and eventually the Japanese guard drew his sword and hit him across the knees with the flat of the blade. And this, to quote Captain Barr, made him see red, and he just took a swing at that Japanese guard. And this would result in actually a bit of a scuffle, because the Japanese weren't really trained in boxing, for want of a better term. They weren't really prepared to deal with being attacked in this manner, so actually he was able to hold his own for a short period before more guards arrived and were able to overpower him, despite his state of malnourishment. And as a result of this, the Japanese guards, after overpowering him, they forced him into a straitjacket. And what they did at this point was they tightened the straitjacket so much that it was almost enough to crack the ribs and prevent any breathing. And they would leave him like this until he was just about to pass out before they would let it go so that he would come back, and then they would resume. And they did this for a half hour before finally they let him out and they threw him into the snow before taking him back and throwing him into his cell and not even allowing him a blanket, just leaving him to catch his breath and be shivering in this cold, dark box after all this.
I remember he saying that that was probably the most difficult day he had because he literally had to struggle for breath, and every time he took a breath, you know, it would tighten up more. So he vividly remembered that. Moving on, like I said, they're in that solitary confinement, 23 and a half hours a day, doing everything they can to stay sane. August 20th, they were liberated, and we'll talk about that real quick as we move on. How they were liberated was I think very interesting. The United States sent in OSS teams of kind of like predecessor to CIA teams of agents that parachuted in. So a team of 6 individuals would parachute into a Japanese camp to negotiate the release or to order the release of the prisoners of war. But they couldn't be guaranteed of how the Japanese are going to react. Are the Japanese going to, are they going to accept the emperor's promise that he is going to surrender or not? So I think it took a lot of courage for these. Through a six-person team that parachuted in over the camp where they were. They're commanded by a guy by the name of Major Ray Nichols. And I'm just going to comment on him that we also have a Wisconsin connection there, because prior to World War II, Major Nichols had spent 10 years in the Wisconsin Army National Guard prior to joining the OSS. And they told the Japanese commander, negotiate the release of all the prisoners, but they didn't admit to the Doolittle Raiders yet. The Japanese were keeping them secret and hidden. They weren't admitting they had them. One of the prisoners was a Commander Cunningham from the U.S. Navy. He was captured on Wake Island before the Doolittle raid, in fact. So he had been over 3.5 years prisoner, almost 3.5 years prisoner. He told Major Nichols, there's 4 prisoners that they're not telling you about, and I think they're Doolittle flyers. They kept pushing on the camp commander, and he was denying them, and they eventually did admit that that they did release them. Lieutenant Nielsen, Lieutenant Height, Sergeant Deshauser were able to walk out of their cells. Lieutenant Barr was probably within weeks, if not days, of death. Days of death. He was incoherent. He couldn't stand. Very, very ill when they brought him out. The others were released right away, flown back home to the United States almost immediately. Barr had to stay in China. He was kept in a hospital to recuperate, but he never fully comprehended that he was released, that he was liberated, because I mean he went from a dirty cell to a clean room, but he was basically treated as a mental case. He's a man with no status. The hospital attendants that were working with him didn't believe his story that he was a Doolittle flyer. They said, well, he's got what we would call today post-traumatic stress, but he's basically is a mental case, what they cleaned him at. He had Chinese attendants in some of these hospitals. Well, he didn't know the difference between, Oriental. So he believed in his head that he was still a prisoner of the Japanese. This was just another tactic to torture him, to play with his mind. So much so to the point that when he was actually walking to the aircraft to come to the United States, he looked at the horizon and said, this is it. I'm not going to stay a prisoner, and took off running. Nowhere to go other than the horizon. Well, obviously he was tackled, restrained, put back in the plane. So there's a way to convince you that you're not a prisoner anymore, is to restrain you and tie you down. He made it back to the United States. He was in the hospital in San Francisco, where again he just kind of got lost in the system. He actually tried to commit suicide by stabbing himself in the chest with a knife he found. That didn't work because the knife was too short. He tried to hang himself from one of the electrical appliances because he wasn't going to remain a prisoner of the Japanese. So then they put him in essentially, I guess we call it a padded room. Still convinced. He doesn't believe he's in the United States. He takes a train ride all the way across to Clinton, Iowa. What's the army called?
It was the Schick General Hospital in Clinton, Iowa. And I just wanted to mention, too, for this, just to make matters worse, when they put him on the train, they had also put him into a straitjacket again.
So here he had probably one of the most vivid nightmare days that he had of being almost suffocated to death, crushed in that straitjacket. They transport him all the way across the country in another straitjacket. So he's still convinced that he's not traveling across the United States plains. He's traveling across deeper into China, and he's still a prisoner of the Japanese. So he's at this General Hospital in Clinton, Iowa. Again, picture him this, the Japanese in a dirty cell, they open up a little window and look at him. Well, now he's in a clean room, and a hospital attendant opens up a little window and looks at him. No one talks to him. So his family came to visit him, but he still wasn't really convinced. He didn't recognize the foster mother, we'll call her that, Mrs. Towns. She looked a little bit old. His brother-in-law came to visit him. He said, he's a little questioned that too, because why didn't his sister come? Well, she was severely pregnant, couldn't travel. Finally, Mrs. Towns got a hold of, by then, Lieutenant General Doolittle. Now this is August, now we're almost to Thanksgiving. That's how long he's going, still thinking that he's a prisoner of the Japanese. And when General Doolittle came to visit him, General Doolittle is a very, I guess, very outgoing kind of guy, and I can just imagine the scene when he walks into that room and sees George. He said he comes walking right in, and he's right away, he's like, "Hi, George, how's it going? Good to see you." And just puts his hand out to him, and they said immediately, the hospital attendant said, Barr just lit up. His face just brightened up. He recognized this was not a Japanese plant. General Doolittle was not a Japanese plant. They went for a walk. General Doolittle visited him. This is a picture of them at the hospital in Iowa. This really jump-started Barr's road to recovery. This is in November. So much so that just a couple weeks later, General Doolittle had a party in Florida, his birthday party, and he had his Raiders come there, which would be the first reunion. Look at the difference. There's George in the hospital, just realizing that he is actually really free. Now here's George, literally maybe 3 weeks later. I think you can see the change in his demeanor right there. Because one of the things that General Doolittle did, when he found George in the hospital, he had no clothes, no money, no name at the hospital. He was kind of a no-status person there. Well, General Doolittle talked to George for a while, stuff like that, but he's kind of got his ire up a little bit. And they said after he talked to George, he went and had a closed-door meeting with the hospital administrator. So now, he may be a short guy, but I'm told that he kind of has, I don't want to call it a temper. He's passionate. And I would love to have had a dialogue of what happened between him and the hospital administrator. But we don't know. There is no record of that. But we do know that George Barr immediately got a brand new uniform with his new first lieutenant rank on it, complete with his ribbons. He got 3.5 years of back pay, $7,000, which came out to, what do we figure out?
Just under $110,000 in today's
dollar. So General Doolittle's short meeting with the hospital administrator had an effect. When they were in Florida, George Barr's still having trouble adjusting. He's kind of uncomfortable around his other Raiders. General Doolittle's the only one that really kind of knows what he's been going through. He talks, Barr and Doolittle talk a little bit, and this is where George lets on to General Doolittle, "I really would like to get back up to Ashland. I really like to get back up, see my alma mater, visit Northland College." Well, he went back to the Iowa hospital. General Doolittle and Mrs. Towns made that happen. So January of 1946, George Barr returned to Ashland. Still having physical and mental recovery, but well on his road to being recovered. And actually, that was his first media interview. Right?
Yes, he actually had an interview with the Daily Press, which actually was the first time that he had ever spoken to the press or anybody outside of their other Raiders about what he had been through.
So that's why I just kind of think it's kind of neat. Even though being a native, okay, yeah. Do you want to step up?
Is it a good time for a human interest story?
Actually, in the very next
Well, you go ahead.
slide, yeah, we will exactly. 'Cause I know.
Okay.
So that I think is very tough. Because even though he's a native New Yorker, grew up most of his life in New York, when he wanted to go somewhere to decompress, where did he ask to go? He wanted to come back here to our little town, visit Northland College, watch a few basketball games and stuff like that. And he came back here again in October of 1946. Is that kind of where you're going to go?
No, actually, the letter that I have is later in 45.
Well, it's actually 46. I looked at that too because those events are in 46. But if you want to come up, please go ahead. We're going to just add a little bit to the program here if you want to step up. We'll have you do that right now. October of 1946.
Thank you.
I know the letter you're talking about, it looks like a 5, doesn't it?
And it is a 6?
It is a 6,
Okay.
because you get them. So this, you want to introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Sure. Hi, my name is Jana Van Evera. My dad was a student at Northland and a basketball player with Red Barr and with Tweet Jensen. Tweet's daughter, Lee Jensen, asked me to speak today. So I'm representing my own family, the Josephsons, and the Jensen family. Lee wrote a little intro, if I can read that, and then
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
read
it's probably-
the letter.
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll-
Yep.
I'll abbreviate it a little.
No, you can. Yes,
Okay.
that's what I was going to read. Well, go ahead.
Greetings from the Dwayne, Tweet, and Marge Jensen family. Thank you to Jason Janicek and VFW Post 690 for honoring George Barr and the Doolittle Raiders on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the raid over Tokyo. True heroes all. I'm so pleased that Jackie Moore, alumni director at Northland, was involved in representing Red's time at Northland, and that the college's archives are filling up with alumnus veterans biographies. That thanks to Orianne Pagel, Dan Crawford, and Don Chase. We must never forget the sacrifices that our military men and women make for the freedoms we enjoy today. As children, my brother Mark and I learned the textbook history of World War II. We were aware of the former POW status of my dad and his friend Red, but rarely heard details of their POW experiences. As related to travel, my dad would say he'd seen enough of the world as a GI, and especially enough of Germany, where he'd been a guest of the Germans. Our encounters with the Barr family, Red, Marcine, Linda, Mary Jo, Christy, and Jeff, were all summertime fun visits. I vividly recall visiting with the Barrs when they camped at Prentice Park, or when we gathered at the Josephson household or at our home. You'll see a very happy photo. Do you have a photo?
Well, this is what we have right here.
Oh, that's it. I can tell you everybody on the picture if you want me to.
Well, you go ahead.
Oh, okay.
You can go figure the letter.
Where did I go? Let's see. Where's the picture? Oh, you'll see a very happy photo. This is a testament to the friendships that Bernie Josephson, Tweet Jensen, and Red Barr developed as students and, more important, basketball players at Northland. Combined with Red and Tweet's POW experiences, they formed a friendship that endured. The heartbreaking retelling of prisoner of war experiences hit home when Red sent my parents and the Josephsons their autographed copies of the book, The Four Came Home, by Colonel Glynis, is that how we pronounce
Yep.
it? Not for the faint of heart, it's the story of the survivors and the gruesome torture they observed. In July of '67, Tweet received a call from Marcine with the news of Red's death at age 50. It was a fitting honor for Red's friends to assist in the arrangements for his funeral at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. The Barr family stayed with the Josephsons and the Jensens. You can only imagine the sadness of this family as their young father was laid to rest. Thank you again to the VFW Post. We also appreciate the Ashland County Veterans Office and Lori Carnahan Lundquist for always reminding us of the ceremony, POWMIA ceremony in September. There's another interesting twist to the Red Tweet friendship. This letter was in my dad's drawer along with his Army journal, recounting when Red made a visit to Ashland. The rest is history. Thanks for allowing our family to share these details. Sincerely, Lee Jensen Bujold.
And this is her dad, I believe. You want to point out her dad?
Okay, from left to right, that's my dad, Bernie, my mom. This is Marge Jensen, the tall one is Tweet Jensen. Don't know, that's Marcine. Don't know, that's Red.
Next to Marcine is Tweet's brother.
Yeah, that's Marcine, and then Red on the outside, and I don't know who the rest of them are.
Well, I'm told that the lady next to Barr is actually my great aunt.
Oh, cool.
There's Betty and Joe
Bernie's-
Brattle up there too.
Brattle?
So,
Okay.
You're down in front.
Rattles, Jingles, oh, there's a bar, that's wonderful.
but I understand that Lee sent you a nice, touching letter between.
It's a funny letter.
Okay.
Are we ready for that?
I think so.
This is a letter, and this was actually 1946, you said.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is a letter from Red Barr to Tweet Jensen. Dear Tweet, have at long last gotten around to writing you. I expected to surprise you last week by dropping up to Ashland without letting you know I was coming. I did just that, but I was the one who got the surprise. Got into Ashland last Thursday, and no tweet. Well, I figured if I couldn't make the rounds in Ashland with you, the next best thing would be to make the rounds with your girl Marcine. So I did just that. In fact, I liked doing it so much the first time that I took Marcine out the next night and again the following night. It may sound like a fairy tale to you, but we became very serious about each other. I went so far as to ask Marcine to marry me, even knowing that you had interest in her. I hope you'll forgive me, Tweet. I don't know how you feel about Marcine, but I'm really serious. I would marry her tomorrow if she would agree to it. For I think she's the nicest and finest girl I've ever met, barring none. In fact, I've made up my mind I'm going to marry her just as soon as she'll agree to it. Something like this doesn't happen every day, Tweet, and I'm hoping that you won't hold it against me. Enough of that for now. And then just some inconsequential stuff. Don't know your address. He was at Drake still playing basketball down in Iowa. So I will send this to Ashland. Hope everything is going all right. Let's see. I saw Molly somebody in Chicago. When I stopped over there, tried to look up Joe, but got lost with Molly. Let's see. I'm all set to go to Minnesota if I get out of the Army. Went to see them while I was in Minneapolis over the weekend. They said I had good possibilities. Well, Tweet, drop me a line and tell me what a rat I am. I'll be waiting to hear from you. Regards to all. Love and kisses, Red.
Isn't
that wonderful?
I think they must have got together because this picture is taken about a decade later, and he was married to that Marcine just 2 months later,
Yeah.
December '46.
And they had 4 children, a boy and 3 girls.
So thank you very much. And
You're
I think we'll
welcome.
take this time also to I know
This is the
Oh,
copy
sorry.
of the book before it came home. This is my family's copy. It was autographed in red ink by Red Barr. So it's a family heirloom. Thank you.
we have I know Corey, you're anxious to speak.
Thank you.
Corey will be up in a few minutes. I think we'll take this time before we go to the presentations to take a few short comments from others that knew the Barr family. There's a few. Is there anyone that wants to make a short anecdote or comments? Was there anyone? Just go ahead and stand up and just say how you knew him and.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say that I knew him personally as a student at Untitled. I was in about the 7th grade at that time, and he was a physical education teacher and a basketball player, of course, but also a coach. Got to know him that way. Other than having just a general idea of, a teacher-student relationship, that's all I knew. But there was one thing, he called me into the office one time, this is maybe like 7th grade, and he had this tape recorder. I shouldn't say tape recorder, it was a wire recorder. I never had seen a wire, in a spool that went across into, on the other side, and the sound was on the wire rather than on the plastic tape or something like that. And I was amazed at that, the first time that I ever had seen anything like that, and maybe I didn't really study it since to get to know how popular it was. But that was one personal relationship that I had with him. But one other comment too, we had mentioned Marcine.
Yeah.
And I want to mention that I live in the town of Eileen.
right there.
Right, his wife. And she lived in the town of Eileen. And I'm from the town of Eileen. I belong to the Eileen Area Historical Society. And I had good reason to write about George Barr, I thought. And this started about, maybe 6 months ago or so. And started putting everything together. I saw the people over at the archives at Northland and was very much intrigued, Oriane and all those people there to give me information, possibilities of other information. Things came in from all directions, including one of those letters that we just heard a little while ago. So anyway, those issues that Jason is holding up there right now is called The Junction. It's the official newsletter from the Eileen Area Historical Society. We've been at it for 15 years. And this particular issue is dedicated to George Barr. And I might say there was so much to write about that it concludes with continued in the next issue. There are about 50 copies that are over there on the table. You're welcome to take one with you. And if you'd like to see part 2, you'll have to sign your name on a little list over there. We can, with your address, and we can get you the part 2 of the story as well.
Did we get anything substantially wrong?
No, I thought it was very good. It clarified things, except that one thing, I was confused by that date on that letter as well. And I couldn't understand how he felt so well in October of 1945. I said, he was going through all this trouble of
Well,
business.
I'm convinced that was just that letter. It fits 1946.
That's right, and because I
I
knew
believe he was
about
actually
that
still in the hospital.
whirlwind
45.
courtship that he had was only supposed to be 2 months, it
Yep.
would have been 14 months. And I thought that was kind of an interesting point as well.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or personal? Go ahead.
I'm going to introduce myself to him because I might have been in his class. But I want to yield the rest of my time to my brother, who's the family storyteller. Gene, tell us about your experience at Adasigan.
Eugene Westland, I was a junior when we called him Mr. Barr at school at that time. We went by the last name, but he was the coach, and I was manager of the basketball team, and so I spent quite a bit of time with George Barr. And one of the incidents that was rather interesting, we had a gym class with not very many there that day. And we were just shooting baskets, and somehow we had a conversation. He said, let's have a game of 21. I don't know when you've done that, where you stand in a spot and shoot a basket, and then you go out, go in and shoot a close-up, and the first one to 21. He says, you and me, he said. Well, sure, I said, we do it. And of course, he beat me so bad. We did it 2 times. And then he sort of teasingly said to me, he said, anything you can do, I can do better. And okay, I says, let's try running broad jump. Because I could run pretty fast. And so we set up in the gym some mats and tried it. And sure enough, I beat him once. And he said, let's try that again. And twice. But when it comes to basketball, he was so far different. But it was a good personal relationship that we had with him. One time I had to stay after school because to get to the game that night, and I just stayed in the Knoxville school there. So he invited me to his home in Ashland here, and got there, and his wife must have been working. There's nobody there, but she came home and he said, "You got to find something for lunch." And she made lunch for us, but then he showed us all this memorabilia from Japan, the model of the bomber that he rode in. But I had many good experiences with George Barr.
Any other one that had any personal memories? Oh, go ahead.
The only thing that I would mention from you is that Barr did get Jimmy Doolittle come back to Ashland and Northern College commencement in 1951, and I was there to see that.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. I don't know if I ever heard about it. Yeah, that he had got Jimmy Doolittle to return to Northern College and be the commencement speaker in '51. We have the copy of his speech, Doolittle's speech, up at the archives. And he remained active with the Alumni Association, because I'm not familiar with Northern College Alumni Association. Maybe Jack can comment on this in a few minutes, but they have that Founders Day dinner. Is that something that still goes on?
No, not anymore.
Oh, not anymore. Well, I guess he was a speaker at the Founders Day dinner, which was the
He made himself available to do a lot of things.
Now he was a teacher for a few years, short time here, but then he ended up getting a job for the federal government. And in closing here, well, we're just going to close this formal presentation. I know there's a lot more we can really talk about George and his post life. He ended up spending. He went to a lot of reunions. Let me see if I have any. Here's some pictures from the reunions. This is just a couple years later. You can see George. General Doolittle is right in the middle, and George is up towards the top. They started out as kind of raucous, rowdy reunion, but then they turned almost more into conventions with people coming. This is just a couple years before George's death. That's all the 4 that came home with that was General Hilger, then Major Hilger, who was the second in command. So we got Chase Nielsen, Jacob Deshauser, Robert Hite and George Barr. And I'm going to close with some words from George Barr himself. But before I get there, I just want to make a comment on Jacob Deshauser. There, he was the bomber, the bombardier on George's aircraft. He was also the youngest person in the craft. He kind of had a religious, not conversion, but a religious awakening during his time in. Because there was a period of time after Lieutenant Mater died where they asked for the commandant, we need something to occupy our minds, please. So they brought a handful of books that all were like religious tracts. And that's what they read, and we had to do a lot of thinking on. Corporal Deschazer, later Sergeant Deschazer, came back from his time as a prisoner, not with hatred, but with love towards the Japanese. He went to college, became a pastor, and he and his wife returned to Japan, not just to Japan, but to Nagoya, the city that he actually dropped bombs on. And he lived in the city he bombed for 30 years as a Christian missionary. I think that was a very interesting side story from one of Barr's compatriots. This is just a couple years before George died. He died of a heart attack in 1967 at 50 years of age. And the VA, being the VA, denied his family any benefits whatsoever, saying that it wasn't a service-connected heart attack. Lieutenant General Doolittle came back into the fray again, and according to him, convinced the government that 3.5 years as a prisoner of the Japanese strained his heart to some degree, and dying at 50. He was the only prisoner, the one that survived, only surviving prisoner to not make it into his 90s. Lieutenant Hite died, the co-pilot died just in 2017, I believe.
I believe he was one of, I think, the last three, if not the last one before Cole.
In closing here, before I turn the floor over to our esteemed state commander, I'm just going to talk about, we had talked about the trial that the Raiders had. Oops, I'm in front of the screen here. They had, in August of 1942, they had a 1-hour trial where they were tried and convicted in a Japanese language trial of war crimes and sentenced to death. The Americans did the same, well, they didn't do the same thing. The Americans also put people on trial for the treatment of the Doolittle Raiders. Due to political reasons, they couldn't get all the right people, but there was 4 people that were identified as bearing some form of malfeasance or guilt in the treatment of the Doolittle Flyers. And the United States Army put them on trial. Stark contrast here, which I think emphasizes a lot of what we should recognize as what I consider our American values, how we want to present ourselves to the world. Instead of having, it would have been, I don't think there would have been a lot of people at the time that if we would have just held, quick hearings and executions. But the United States Army put these 4 officers on trial, and in stark contrast to what the Japanese did, they provided them as full legal process as you're going to get in a military commission hearing. They gave them defense counsel. I like this picture because it shows American officers standing up. These are their defense counsel. It was not a career-enhancing move to defend the Japanese that held the Doolittle Flyers, but that was the type of point that America was trying to give to the world. There is a way to do things. There is a way to hold people accountable. And we're not only are we going to hold them accountable, but we're going to give them every benefit. We're going to give them a fair trial. Instead of a 1-hour show trial, this went on for months. I mean, including the investigation. These defense lawyers were flying to Japan, finding witnesses. These American officers put on an aggressive defense on behalf of their Japanese pride. This guy, he was a pilot by training. His sympathies are with the Doolittle Flyers. The Doolittle Flyers were folk heroes in the American Air Corps. And this is after sentencing. And these American lawyers got up and stood next to their clients when they read their sentencing. And it was not everyone assumed it was a predetermined outcome. They're going to be found guilty and executed. The defense, even though they're found guilty, I consider that the defense lawyers actually won over the military commission. And these 4 were found guilty, but not guilty. It was kind of a weird verdict. But they definitely weren't executed. They were given just a few years apiece. The longest sentence was given to one of the middle officers who was one of the lawyers at the Japanese trial. The theory being, you knew better. You knew this trial was a farce. That's why you've got the longest sentence of all of them. And I just, to me, it's an extremely proud moment for me because this process here kind of emphasized what these American boys were fighting for. What we want that American ideal of fair play and justice, even to the most, what we consider the most despicable acts. So I'm just going to, with that, I am just going to close with some words from George Barr himself, kind of related to the trial of the one. So just bear with me here. For 3 years, I was beaten, kicked, and pummeled pretty regularly by the Japanese and systematically starved every day. I was captured by the Japs the morning of April 19, 1942. We don't use the term Japs now, but I'll stay with his language. The day after we bombed Tokyo, and the nightmare of starvation and beatings began on the 20th and did not end until last summer. I watched Bob Meter, as nice a guy as you'll ever meet, die of starvation, mistreatment in our prison at Nanking. I know that the Japanese took 3 of the Doolittle flyers, Dean Hallmark, Bill Farrell, Harold Spatz, and executed them. I have nightmares even now when I wake up, panting for breath and struggling to free myself from the Japanese straitjacket in which I spent an hour of the worst torture I've ever endured because I resented a blow from one of the guards. But if I had the chance now to put any of those guards in a straitjacket, I would not do it. I have learned that force accomplishes nothing. It is idiotic. Mass force, which is war, is the ultimate idiocy. General Douglas MacArthur is pursuing the right course in handling the Japanese. He is bringing democratic processes to them through which they can become decent people. They need to be educated. I believe another method of educating them would be an exchange of students between our 2 countries. Japanese students coming here and our students spending time in Japan. This exchange is necessary because we must learn something about the Japanese too, just as they must learn our ways. It will be impossible to educate them in the ways of democracy unless we know and understand their point of view now. That is the only road towards lasting peace. 3 of the Japanese officials who had a part in the execution of my 3 pals have been sentenced to 5 years. I do not think this sentence is too light. In fact, in the case of Captain Tatsudo Sodahiro, who was a commandant of the Kwangjang military prison and who directed the firing squad, it may be too severe. He simply obeyed orders which came from the higher-ups, and when we were in Kwangjang, he was as decent to us as he could be. The men who gave the orders should be brought to trial, but the trial and punishment should be based on justice, not this business of give them a fair trial and then shoot them. The Japanese who beat us were the victims of fear, which is to say victims of the Japanese system. They were afraid of their superior officers, afraid even of their fellow guards who might carry stories about them to higher-ups, and their officers were afraid of the men above them. When I came out of that straitjacket, one of the guards, my only friend among them, offered me a Japanese cigarette in my cell. He took a great chance. He took a great chance doing that. And I'll never forget him, or I'll never forget that or him. So, those are the direct words of Captain George Barr himself shortly after he returned home. This was only a year after being liberated. So, with that being said, does anyone have any comments or questions? And then we'll move on to our next speaker. John.
I didn't realize when those B-25s took off that they just flew into the wind for uplift. They didn't have catapults.
No.
So that in itself is really kind of a miraculous thing with a short takeoff like that. But I know on a carrier, anytime they have carrier qualifications, they fly into the wind, even with a catapult, for lift. But those were large planes, they weren't fighters, so I thought that was I didn't realize that they didn't have catapults.
Oh. Okay, now with that being said, I'm going to ask our honor guard, please escort our state commander up.
So, thank you for having me here today. I knew none of this, and this is such a great educational experience just for me. My grandfather, he was also in the Army Air Corps in World War II. He wasn't in Japan. He was flying missions over France and Italy, but just listening to what they would talk about during the war. My grandpa was in the Army Air Corps, and my other grandfather, who was also in the United States Navy. I have no words to describe what you just did today. What he went through, and that he was able to survive and come home, that's nothing short of a miracle. So for all of us who have served, we'll never quite know what he went through. Even though all of us know the stress of combat, we'll never know what George Barr went through. So as you walk away here today, please, give thanks for what you have. I mean, it can be gone in a heartbeat. It could have been gone for him in a heartbeat. They could have taken him out at any point in time and just been done with it. So be thankful for what you have. And kind of the fact that he came home and just became this displaced person, really missing in action almost. A better system back then would have probably helped him out. Would have gotten him some better help than, much more than what we have today as far as what we have for a system. Even though it's not perfect, the VA is not perfect. It's still a much better system today. But thinking about him as missing in action, we definitely don't want to forget all of our other brothers and sisters who are still listed as missing in action. In fact, over 80,000 of them from World War II to today across the United States are still considered missing in action, still waiting to come home. And in Wisconsin here, it's over 1,500. So, we are committed as an organization, the VFW is, to bringing our Wisconsin missing in action home, because we need to give those families closure. Much like George was able to finally come home to his family, we want to have those families have that same feeling. So we do partner with the UW MIA project. So it's at the University of Wisconsin down in Madison, and they work with the POW, they call it the DPAA, to bring home missing in action throughout the United States. But we are actively raising funds through the VFW and our auxiliary side to make sure that they are able to focus on just strictly Wisconsin and bring home our Wisconsin MIA, because we need to give those families closure just as much as the family of George Barr was able to greet him. We want those families to be able to greet their loved ones as well. So thank you, Commander Janicek. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. A great education today, a great presentation, and I hope you keep doing this every single year. Thank you.
If you could stay up here. Oh, right. If I could have our Northern College representatives come forward, please. One of our 2-hour-long program here today, started out, is we want to recognize George Barr, and we also want to recognize his involvement in our community and being the class of 42 of Northern College. So with that, Commander Geyser would help me with this. The VFW commissioned this from a local artist, and we'll be gifting it to the Northern College Alumni Association for prominent display.
I actually have August Walham, class of 23, and Don Chaselin, our relations intern, AJ Gregg, graduating this year to receive that. It'll be displayed in Wheeler Hall so that our students and our alumni can appreciate it. Right next to our World War II Veterans Memorial,
Okay.
for those who aren't aware.
So this is George Barr. This is taken on the crew of the Hornet, the date just before he was captured. So on behalf of the VFW Post 690, please accept this on our behalf. There you go. You're not really set up for good photographs.
No, it's fine. It's great.
No, never mind.
Thank you. I don't want to make these comments or remarks or.
Yeah, I guess if I can make a couple of remarks. My name is Seamus Gregory. I'm the Director of Athletics at Northland College. And with my head men's basketball coach, Scott Sorensen, Jackie Moore from Alumni Relations, Dan Crawford, Don Chase, and our students, all of our students at Northland College. Ashland is a very small community, as we know. It's based off family and community. And ultimately, for us at Northland College and the persons that we bring into our institution, Ashland's very important fabric for us. Obviously, George was a tremendous basketball player and athlete. We've redone our Hall of Fame through some hard work this past year. COVID has taken a toll on everybody, as you guys know, but with regards to athletics and with regards to our student population, the academics that we bring to the area, George is, again, a true alumni in every sense of the word, and ultimately, it's based off family. Came back to Northland College, played basketball as a part of the athletic family, was a part of the student population family. So on behalf of us, from all of us at Northland College, from the bottom of our hearts, come watch a basketball game if you can, and please continue to support our students. They do a tremendous job at Northland College, so we really, really appreciate you having us here today.
Thank you very much.
As it was said, my name is August. I am one of the 3 Northland College Student Association co-presidents. So it is my father's prior service, and I hadn't known of this story at all. He's an Army grad, West Point grad. So it is an extreme honor to hear about the story and accept this. And the story of George Barr I will help carry this forward and let my fellow students know why we have this painting up in the war. So thank you very much for
Thank you for coming.
We have a student actually here writing a dress article too, so it'll be in the next edition of the student paper as well. So doing what we can to share right now. Thank you everyone for allowing us to be here today and inviting us to this. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the formal part of our program. We're just gonna have a few closing comments, and then we do have coffee.